Everybody, Charles from GMAT Ninja here, GMAT Club's verbal expert. This is it, Series 3, video number 9. This is the end of the series. So thank you, everybody who's joined us live. 9 videos, 29 days. I'm going to take a big nap when we're done. So thank you. Love the way the live group is responding. You guys are helping each other a ton in the comments. I see that every week. Love to see it. That's the spirit of GMAT Club. Come to the forum. Maybe not everybody's an expert. Even the experts make tons of mistakes, but the spirit is we help each other out. Test takers helping test takers. Come see us on the forums if you're new to it. All right, today we're going to talk about countable and non-countable modifiers on GMAT sentence correction. Not a super sexy topic, also not a gigantic topic. This isn't something you're going to see tons and tons and tons of questions on, but maybe on your exam out of your 10 or 12 or 13 sentence correction questions, maybe you'll see this come up 2 or 3 times, something like that. But it's one of those things that's been kind of bugging me for years, where I think there's sort of a very simple, basic way to approach it. And that's what we all get taught. And that's what sort of the short version is when test prep folks teach their students about it. But then there's some questions that if you're thinking about it in that very simple, basic way, you'll make some mistakes. So my goal for today, we're going to go over the basics. I'm going to start giving you wrinkles on the basics, and we'll get to some of the harder variations and little exceptions on it. Basics first. So some modifiers are countable, meaning that if they're modifying a noun, they can only modify a countable noun. So for example, here are examples of sentences that are not quite right. Doughnuts are a thing you can count. Now, what I mean by that, it's a grammatical distinction. Don't confuse countability with quantifiability. Doughnuts I can count. 1 donut, 2 donuts, 3 donuts. They're integers, right? I can say 1 donuts, 2 donuts, 3 donuts. So if I'm using donuts as the noun, I can't modify it using much. Why? Much only works with non-countable nouns. So for example, I could say I ate too much oatmeal because I can't count oatmeal. 1 oatmeal, 2 oatmeals, 3 oatmeals. Doesn't make sense. But I can't use that non-countable modifier with a countable noun. Same idea. Few or fewer is countable, less is not. Many, countable, much is not. Amount, not countable. Number is countable. So I can't say it a large amount of donuts. That's the way I think most Americans would say it. Nothing wrong with that in real life, arguably. Amount, not countable. Donuts countable. Problem. One very, very small thing here. I ate a very little donuts today. This is one of the wrinkles that shows up every once in a while. Little's a really funny one. So I would argue that these 3 pairs, these are your most fundamental ones. Make sure you notice many and much. Make sure you notice few or fewer and less, number and amount. Little's funny because it can modify something that's countable. And if we're doing that, we're talking about size. So for example, if I say I ate very little donuts today, because donuts are countable, I'm talking about those little tiny donuts they sell at Starbucks for $4 that I don't understand. If we're talking about something that's not countable, so for example, if I say, let's say oatmeal, I can still say I ate very little oatmeal today. Oatmeal's not countable, but now it means something different. Now we're talking about quantity. So very small wrinkle there. There's only about 3 official questions that I can think of where they use the word little and you have to worry about whether it's countable or not. So level 1 of countable and non-countable modifiers. Just make sure that these guys jump off the page at you. If you see a choice between many and much, think about what's being modified. You see a choice between less and few, think about what's being modified. If you see a choice between amount and number, or even if you just see amount hanging out by itself, just think, okay, is that modifying a countable noun? If so, it's a problem, because amount can only modify something that's not countable. That's it for the basics. I'll give you 2 or 3 pretty easy questions to start with. Then we'll get into some funny wrinkles, some funny little exceptions, some funny gray areas, because that's what GMAT sentence correction is all about. Remember, the section's not called reading and grammar, it's verbal reasoning. And again, you can roll your eyes at that a little bit and say, wow, these test makers are pretentious with their terminology. That may well be true. But there's something there that I think helps you as a test taker to think, hey, it's not about strict grammar rules. It's about recognizing when there might be an exception and making sure you keep your head in the game, apply logic, apply reasoning as much as you can. Okay, let's get into the first example. And this one's just a warm up. They'll get nastier. So I'm gonna move this out of the way. Okay, and as always, live group. As soon as you have an answer, please let us know. I'm very, very much used to getting feedback as I teach, doing these live videos. I stare into a camera, I see the chat screen, that's it. So the more that's on the chat screen, the happier I am, the more I can tailor it to you guys. And if this is your first time joining one of these videos, I recommend taking a screenshot so you have the question in front of you in case you need to refer back to it once I take it off the screen and come back to the board. All right, live group is slicing right through this. Awesome. Like I said, just to warm up, totally mechanical. One of the things I talk about all the time on sentence correction, when the GMAT gives you a gift, accept it. They gave you a gift this time. Questions get a whole lot harder than this. Less than 400 rhinos. Can you count rhinos? Yeah, absolutely. You don't want to get too close to them when you count them because those dudes are big. Less than 400 rhinos? No, less not countable rhinos. Countable, obviously, we even have 400 of them. Clearly, we had to count them to get to 400. Same thing here, 400 rhinos, not cool. Same thing in E, less than 400 rhinos, can't do that. Down to C and D within about 20 seconds. Wonderful, feels great, makes me happy. And now, really easy error in C as well. I don't even have to read D very carefully. Occupying a small fraction of the species' former range, the Malay Peninsula, which is a very beautiful place, one of my favorite places in the world. But it doesn't really make sense to say that the peninsula itself occupies the former range of the rhinos. It would be the rhinos that occupy their former range. So C's out. And that's it. D's our answer. I don't think any issues at all really in the live group. So that's fantastic. All right, that should warm up. These are going to start getting a little harder once we get to the fourth and fifth questions. That's when I'm going to really start throwing you guys curveballs. Or the GMAT will throw you the curveballs. Don't blame the messenger. And here's number 2. If you're in the live group, give you about 15 more seconds. Give me your best guess. Seeing a little bit of shyness here this morning. Okay, cool. Seeing a little more issues here. Good. I'm trying to kind of slowly ramp up the difficulty level of these questions. So got about 80% agreement out of the live group, a couple dissenters, which is cool. All right. So again, since this is a video on countable and non-countable modifiers, hopefully the word less jumped off the page at you right away. They did a funny thing here, though. So as you look at D and E, less limitations, what's the word less doing there? Well, pretty obvious. Less is modifying limitations. Can you count limitations? Absolutely. 1 limitation, 2 limitations, 3 limitations. So what are the limitations on my GMAT score? I've got 600 of them. Okay, fine. Does it make sense to talk about half a limitation? No, that doesn't make any sense. Definitely countable. Again, think about countability as a grammatical distinction, not purely a logical one. You can quantify oatmeal, but you can't grammatically count it. 1 oatmeal, 2 oatmeal, 3 oatmeals. You can definitely count limitations. Less, non-countable. So these are out right away. No D, no E for that reason. Don't even have to think about the rest of it. Now, what's going on in A, B, and C? It's no longer modifying a noun, and that's the key. Whose access to water was less limited. Now less is modifying that adjective. Limited, if you like your jargon, less is working as an adverb. It's not modifying a noun. So this whole business of countable, not countable, irrelevant to A, B, and C, as it turns out, because less is not modifying a noun. It's just modifying something else, working as an adverb. In that case, we don't have to worry about counting because it's not modifying a noun. So in that sense, A, B, and C are all okay, less limited. Okay, that's not a problem. So what else is going on here? Hopefully the thing that jumps out at you, I'm not sure we had a whole lot of B and C in there. In the live group, we have where. Well, I think most of you probably know this. Where needs to modify a place. Are clans a place? No, clans are a group of people. Doesn't make sense to say the Anasazi abandoned their homes to join other clans where something happened. And we're down to A. And once again, this falls in the category of GMAT gifts, small wrinkle. Just because you see less or few or much or many or amount doesn't necessarily mean a noun is being modified. You got to keep your head in the game a little bit on that. The basic rule, again, easy, right? Less can only modify something that's not countable. If it's modifying a noun, it can only modify a non-countable noun. At times, less can modify a verb, can modify another modifier. So if that's the case, just make sure that you're paying attention to what is the function of the word less. If it's not modifying a noun, no reason to worry about countability. Okay, that's number 2. Number 3, still fairly straightforward. And then it's going to get funky. And you can see this is the one that inspired the title of the video. So much dioxins. And you might not know what a dioxin is. And that's kind of the point. So see if you can think through it anyway. All right, now we're causing trouble. Got lots of E's, D's, B's, A's. Any takers for C? I feel like an auctioneer. More B's. Ooh, very cool. Okay, somebody stuck on D and B. Thank you, everybody. If you're stuck, as always, please let us know. Good, good, good. This one's tough. This caused a lot of trouble. Gonna be totally honest with you. When first time I saw this question, I don't remember if I got it wrong, but I remember really struggling on it because I was like, well, I don't know what's a dioxin. I don't know if you can count dioxins or not. I mean, I know what a dioxin. I knew that it was some kind of chemical, and by the way, that's implied by the context, right? So it sounds like some sort of pollutant or something. Maybe you don't know that it's a chemical exactly or a class of chemicals, but it's something that comes from the incineration of waste. It's got to be some sort of chemical substance. Maybe it's a gas, maybe it's a liquid. I don't know, but something like that. So, okay, fine. How much does that help you? I'm not sure because I was sitting there going, oh, is dioxin countable or non-countable? Countable or non-countable? I don't know. There's a hint, and somebody brought it up in the live group, and I really appreciate that. Dioxins here is plural. So even if you're not sure what it is, or you've never tried to count dioxins before, everyone's tried to count donuts, 1 donut, 2 donuts, 3 donuts, do it all the time. Rhinos, we count them all the time. Do you count dioxins? Maybe there's some chemists out there that do, but other than that, no, most people don't. They give you the hint in here, it's plural. Dioxins. Oatmeal, for example, notice is not plural, it's never plural. We don't talk about oatmeals, we talk about oatmeal, singular, non-countable noun. So it's not strictly true. We can come up with exceptions, but it's a pretty good bet. If something's plural, you must be able to count it. So for that reason here, it does turn out that dioxins is countable. They're not trying to be super tricky. They're giving you a case where, hey, it's plural. And if your best guess is that's going to be countable, that's going to make the most sense. Much isn't going to work for you. And for that reason, A, B, C, out. D, I've had some love for D out of the live group. Here's the thing I want you to notice. The thing I want to have jump off the page at you in D. It's that parallelism right there. And North Americans are exposed to come from the incineration of wastes. Now you've got to think about what follows that and. North Americans are currently exposed to. It's kind of a clause. It's a pretty funky clause, but we've got subject, verb, et cetera, et cetera. Something has to be parallel to that. What is it? Many of the dioxins that are currently uncontrolled. I don't really see anything. The temptation is to say we're modifying the dioxins here, but we're not. This isn't contextualized as a modifier. If this says and that North Americans are currently exposed to, now we can talk. Now that might be parallel. Many of the dioxins that are currently uncontrolled, many of the dioxins that North Americans are exposed to would be parallel in this case. Without the that, we don't have anything parallel to this little funky clause. For that reason, D's out. We can talk about some of the other minor issues here, but that's the big thing. What about E? As always on sentence correction, find 4 wrong answers. You don't necessarily need to love the right answer, but have we cleaned up the issues? Many dioxins, cool. No issues with parallelism at all. Many of the dioxins to which North Americans are exposed, nice and clean, no issues. You might look at this, depending on what part of the world you're in, and say, well, that sounds awkward. If you've watched any of my videos, you've heard me say this 1,000 times. Don't go off of ear. I think this sounds funny. It's not how I would say it. Nobody cares what I would say. Many of the currently uncontrolled dioxins, your countable, non-countable is fine. Perfectly logical modifier. No issues at all with the parallelism. Use your answer. Okay, that one was tough for the live group. Next one may or may not find tough. It actually might be a little easier. Let's take a swing. Nice and short. I'm getting a comment from the live group. There was confusion about the video title. That was actually kind of deliberately a joke because this is a question that throws people off. So in that video title, it was deliberately wrong. So much dioxins is wrong. And then in the description of the video, I talk about eating too much donuts, which is also wrong. Okay, we're actually getting a pretty good mix from the live group. A lot of E's, but getting some C's and B's too. Fantastic. So let me tell you the most common error I see on this one, especially for people just starting out, especially by native speakers who tend to have the habit of kind of reacting based on kind of sound at first as they go, oh yeah. E is too wordy. E sounds crappy. Why would we say it that way? It's indirect, it's long. Whoa, that's not a big deal. Don't overreact to long, wordy, indirect, not where your brain needs to go. And we have a couple of videos that kind of talk about sequencing on sentence correction. One at the beginning of this series where we talked about not falling in love with splits. Another one where we talked about getting your priority straight on sentence correction. Same thing here. Don't rely on sound. You want to find those definite errors first, things that you can point to and say this is wrong for a specific reason. And this question's loaded with them. It's great. Little water or services. Okay, little water. So remember what we said at the beginning. Little can modify countable or non-countable. The trouble is it means different things. If I say little donuts, I mean those very small donuts that they sell at Starbucks for way too much. I want a dozen big donuts, not a bunch of little donuts. Anyway, little water, no problem. Water's not countable. Little's not countable, or can be used for non-countable. What does that mean? Small quantity of water, because it's not countable. Cool. Services, countable. So now what are we talking about? Little services, very small services. Nonsense, right? Really subtle, but for that reason, A is out. B has the exact same thing. They just switch the verb around. B's out. D has the exact same thing too. Very little services, small services. We're talking about small and accountable thing. Very small dogs, little yappy type dogs, little donuts, little ridiculous donuts. Little services, very, very tiny services. Don't know what that means. It's nonsense. And then as some folks have pointed out, it's subtle. It's really, really hard to hear, which is part of why I keep saying get your ear out of your GMAT sentence correction as best you can, especially native speakers. Few services and little water exists. Well, this is a plural, even though the last thing is singular. Water is singular, but what's the subject for that verb? Services and water, that's a plural thing. So if you can't hear it right away, that's fine. They exists. That's not going to work. And you're left with that one that sounds crappy, long, wordy. You don't like it. Fair enough. Again, one more shot into the series to poke at you guys a little bit. Don't fall in love. Don't listen to it. Find those nice concrete errors. You've got your little water, your few services. That should jump off the page at you. Lots of nice subject verb. Good, hard, straightforward question all at the same time. Okay, this next one, some of you guys are going to recognize this next one. It is obviously based on an official GMAT question. I'm not going to go through the whole question just because it gets into a whole bunch of other issues that really aren't what I want to cover in this particular video. And I don't want to get bogged down in that. So I've stripped it down a little bit, and I just have a nice, easy, you have three choices here. I just want you to react to the however much here and tell me if however much is fine, however much is wrong, and if so, why is it wrong? And if you've got something that's not one of these choices, if you think it's wrong for a different reason in the live group, please let us know. Love to hear your thoughts on it. And if you're not sure, don't be shy. We're getting agreement from the first dozen or so out of the live group. If you're looking at those guys and going, you're nuts, please let us know. Yeah, good. Okay, perfect. So live group nailed this. And I hinted at this point a couple questions ago. The idea that you want to be careful. A lot of people react to this. Probably the most common mistake I see in this question. Plenty of other reasons to miss this question, by the way. Go ahead and Google this. Find it on GMAT Club. Give this one a shot. It's in the verbal guide as well. So there's a lot of really cool stuff in there that I think is really, really good to learn. It's one of my very, very favorite examples. One of my favorite questions that kind of gets you into the right mindset for sentence correction. So if you haven't seen this question before, spend some time on it. one of the errors I see is people go, much voters, much, not countable. Voters, they're like people. You can count them, 1 voter, 2 voters, 3 voters. You better be able to count voters or else all of our elections are invalid. Much voters, not cool. And as a lot of people in the live group pointed out, it's not modifying voters. What's the however much? What is there much of? Agreement, right? The however much again here is, if you like your jargon, it's an adverb. It's modifying this whole thing, the amount of agreement that there's waste in government and so on. So in this case, totally fine. Can we say there's much agreement? Absolutely. However much the voters may agree, it's modifying that verb phrase. No issues here at all. So I want you guys tuned into that as you do some of these questions. There's a whole bunch of these kind of scattered around where you could make the mistake of saying, oh, less is right next to a countable noun or much is right next to a countable noun, but think a little bit about what's its function. Okay, that's enough of that one. And I'm getting the advice from some of the live group to make a PDF of favorite questions. It's actually something we have in the works. I'll put that up on the GMAT Club forum at some point in the next month or two, is my top 10 or 15 favorite sentence corrections, critical reasonings. I don't know about reading comp. We might do that. So keep an eye out for that. And let's get to a new question. As threatened, I think these are going to get harder for you guys. Maybe not. I see a lot of errors on this, but maybe, hopefully I've primed you enough you won't have too much trouble. Go ahead and take a minute. Okay, getting some disagreement. Nice mix of B and E. Okay, awesome. And again, thank you, everybody. One thing that's been really cool over this series of live sessions and 9 we've done in this last month, I just see the participation going up and up and up, and I'm seeing familiar names. It just makes me happy. I wish I could call on some of you guys. I wish some of you guys had a microphone, because there's names I've seen for, you know, most of these videos, and I want to go, okay, why'd you pick that? Because I'm actually seeing some of you guys evolve and learn stuff, and that's really, really fun. And I know it's boring for the non-live viewers to see me talk about that, but it's one of the things that makes these really enjoyable. So thank you, live group. Okay, a bunch of different things you could pick on here. So when we talk about sort of your general sentence correction technique, you're looking for the things that are potentially high leverage that get you an easy elimination. A lot of directions you can go in. I'm going to start with C and D, not because that's the place you need to start, but because I think that's a pretty good, easy place to start in this case. 41 million tons, nearly 25% less than 1978. How can we compare a harvest or a number of tons or an amount of rice to a year? That doesn't make any sense at all. We don't even have to worry about the countable, non-countable thing in C and D, just because, hey, the logic of the comparison, nonsense. Okay, what about the rest of them? Well, another thing that jumps off the page at me, and yes, for the moment, I'm deliberately ignoring the issue of fewer and less, and I'll say why at the end. Fewer than that of. Well, if you watch some of our videos on comparisons, I talked a lot about that of and those of. And those actually aren't comparisons inherently. Those are pronouns. That is a singular pronoun, needs to refer back to something singular, obviously. Those, plural pronoun, needs to refer back to something plural. You see these a lot in GMAT comparison questions. So I'm going to take advantage of those here. Let's start with A. To about 41 million tons, nearly 25% less than those of the 1978 harvest. The only plural that those could possibly refer to here is the tons, right? I don't see anything else in there. So let's reread the sentence, punch something in place of those, see if it makes sense. So reduced India's rice production to about 41 million tons, nearly 25% less than the tons of the 1978 harvest. That comparison makes no sense at all. Less than the tons of the harvest. You could argue a couple different things there. One is the logic of that comparison. It's just batty. The second thing is less than the tons. I'm not sure you could say that either. Less non-countable, tons countable. Plenty of reasons to ditch A. How about E? We've got that of again. Fewer than that of the harvest. So now we're looking for a singular. What are our options here? Production, I guess, is the only thing that is even going to give us a shot. Fewer than the production of the harvest. You got a bunch of issues there. Production, so we can focus first, if you want, on the countable, non-countable issue, because that's why you're here. So much dioxins, so much donuts, huge amount of donuts. Fewer than that of, fewer than production. I don't think that makes any sense, just because production, not countable, right? One production, two productions, three productions. If we're talking about productions in the sense of, let's say, theatrical productions, maybe those are countable. Here, production of the harvest, not something you would count. We're not interested in three productions. So fewer than the productions, I just don't think that makes any sense, or than the production, because this is singular. So that's one issue. To me, that's an automatic elimination. You could also argue right here, production of the harvest. We could argue very, very strongly that that's redundant. So fewer than the production, you've got a countable, non-countable issue, also have a logical issue. And then you arguably have a redundancy problem here. Fewer than the production of the harvest doesn't make any sense. So for that reason, E is out. I hope you like B. Less than the harvest. Sure. We don't have any issues there at all in terms of the countable, non-countable. Less isn't modifying something that's countable. We're not saying less tons of rice than the 1978 harvest. That's not what we're saying. It's just less than the harvest. So 41 million tons, 25% less than the harvest. No problem. Makes total sense logically. No error there on the countable, non-countable. There you go. Okay. We've got, I think, two more. This one's going to get a little mucky. It's a longer one. It's going to take me a minute or two to get it, everything I want on the board. It's actually one of the questions that inspired this whole video. So enjoy it, everybody. Wow, excellent. Live group is smoking this. Getting a little bit of dissent here, a little bit of A, B, lots of C, a little bit of E in there. So again, anybody who disagrees with the crowd, when the crowd starts going in one direction, love it if you disagree and you have the guts to say, hey, everybody else is saying one thing, I'm saying another. Because sometimes you're going to be right. And again, that's how you learn to put yourself out there. So thank you so much, live group, especially the ones that disagreed with the crowd. Here's a mistake I see all the time, and hopefully part of why the live group did so well on this is you might have seen right away, hey, this lesson amount thing actually isn't really an issue, and let's talk about why. Two ways to think about it. So again, the thing you see here, you've got less than 3 of these, we've got less here in A, C, and E, less than 4 million pounds, we've got amount lower, and we've got lower amount. So two things. Arguably the most important thing here is that, look, all of these are non-countable modifiers being compared to, so lower amount than, less than 4 million pounds. You might be saying, okay, that pounds is countable. You can count pounds, 1 pound, 2 pounds, 3 pounds. How could we possibly use lesser amount there? First of all, you don't really have a choice. All of those modifiers are non-countable, so you have to accept it. It's not a decision point. You see this kind of thing all the time on the GMAT where we go, hey, based on what I was taught or how I think this should work, there's an issue here. And I can point to all sorts of GMAT questions where I say, yeah, I actually train my students to think that this thing is wrong. And I know there's exceptions to it. And sometimes it's easier to say, wow, the exceptions are where we're not going to worry about it. And I look at it and I go, yeah, this thing I think is really shaky. I can point to GMAT questions where this construction is wrong, but that same construction appears in all 5 answer choices. If it's in all 5 answer choices, nothing to worry about there. That's my first thought. Second thought, and some of the live groups starting to chime in on this, and you're absolutely right. You get into a funny gray area here. So grammatically, are pounds countable? Of course. But is this thing really countable? You've got 4 million pounds. You've got this pile of landings here, I guess. I want to say pile of fish. But you've got this number of landings, okay, well, at the pounds, so pounds of fish, right? That's what we're talking about. You've got this pile of fish. Is that something that's indivisible in the way that you would think about something that you count people, 1 person, 2 people, 3 people, right? Indivisible, countable. Hey, could you have half a pound here? Sure, why not? And in that sense, you could argue that when we're talking about 4 million pounds, maybe it isn't really countable. And you get into a little bit of a gray area. I don't want you to get too mechanical here and say, pounds are countable. I would eliminate all 5 answer choices because of it. Don't get too mechanical, because in this case, you could argue, well, hey, this is a lump of fish. No problem saying it's less than this overall quantity of this lump of fish. You could argue that it's non-countable. GMAT obviously is taking that position here. Cool. And in any case, it's not a decision point. Don't worry about it. And very, very typical of the GMAT. Very, very typical. It's like, here's a little wrinkle. We don't have a lot of absolute rules. I wish there were more of them. It would make your lives easier. It would make my life easier. As it turns out here, it's like, I can come up with contexts where when we're talking about pounds, we're talking about discrete countable things. In this case, that 4 million pounds, not necessarily a discrete countable thing. So non-countable modifier is totally acceptable. Welcome to the GMAT, everybody. And then from there, I'm not going to make too much of the rest of this. Most of it's about a verb tense thing. I think we might have gone through this in another video. I can't remember. All these questions start to blur in my head a little bit. But most of the deal now is about verb tense. So by 1920, overfishing and the proliferation of mill dams and culverts that have blocked shad migrations had reduced landings. When you think about that timeline in A, we got issues. So we've got by 1920, all of these things that have blocked migrations, have blocked that present perfect tense. What does that imply? That implies something that started in the past, still going on now. But then we get to this had reduced landings. And we're talking about the time period up to 1920. Very, very clear from the context. We're only talking about what happened up to 1920. That's in the past. So using your present perfect have blocked, that's wrong. I'm going to skip around a little bit. What about C? That blocked shad migrations. Okay, in the past, blocked migrations had reduced landings in the more distant past. By 1920, they had reduced landings. That looks pretty good. D, that blocked shad reduced landings. I think this is one of those cases where you really, really need that past perfect, because this business of reducing the landings, had reduced landings, gets interrupted in the past, right? Gets interrupted in 1920. So for that reason, D is not as good as C. I don't want to make too much of this having blocked thing. I'm also not making much of the amount lower. I don't love it. It's just a lot clearer to say less than 4 million pounds. I think that lower amount or amount lower isn't a great way to say it. I don't want you overreacting to that. Again, that starts to get us into the realm of sound. Don't want you overreacting to that part of it. The only other real difference here between B, C, and E, it's this business of having blocked shad. It's a whole separate video to get into that business. I don't want to get too bogged down in that now because I want to kind of stick to our theme of the countable, non-countable, and I've got one more good question for you guys after this one. But it really doesn't make a ton of sense. So having blocked shad from doing something, then it reduced landings. There's something really, really funky about that timeline. And again, I don't want to get too far in the weeds with it. Why not just keep the really, really simple expression here and say these obstacles or the proliferation of obstacles that blocked shad? Why are we saying the proliferation of obstacles having blocked shad maybe further back in the past? It's a really, really, really strange way to say something that's really, really simple. The proliferation of these obstacles that blocked shad from migrating. That's the short version. If you're interested in a longer version, feel free to tag me on this thread on GMAT Club. We'll do our best to weigh in. Already some good content on this question on the forum. If you're curious about that, go take a look. But really, this whole business of countable, non-countable, they made it a non-issue on this question. Okay, one last question. So this one's from the GMAT prep. So if you still plan to take those default, the free GMAT prep tests 1 and 2, and you are worried about having knowledge of one of the questions pollute your score, this would be the time to bail. Last question is going to be one from the GMAT prep, and then we're going to finish for the day. So if you're planning to do those later, now's your chance to drop out. And thank you so much for joining us this far. For the rest of you who've either already done those GMAT preps or don't mind getting one question in your heads, stick with me, one of my very favorites. Ooh, all right, now we got some pain. I think we have people picking everything but A. Fantastic. Okay, let's start with the easy part. You're watching the end of a video on countable, non-countable modifiers. Let's start there. 7 people, you can count people, have been killed by the great white shark, the man-eater of the movies. Less than those There's your pronoun referring back to people, presumably. Less than the people. People are countable. Less, not countable. A is the only thing that nobody in the live group chose that I can see. So fantastic. Fewer than have been killed. Okay, that's better, right? Fewer countable, people countable. We're in okay shape there, at least with the countable, non-countable thing. What about C? Couple things you should notice there. And remember, sentence correction. What's it really about? How much grammar you memorized? Not it. Basic backbone of grammar? Sure. Not a ton of it. Don't need a lot of jargon. Don't talk about gerunds and adjectival modifiers, simple versus complex gerunds. If that blows your hair back, go nuts. You don't need a lot of technical stuff. It's not grammar and reading, verbal reasoning. What's sentence correction really about? Can you notice the things that are high leverage? Really useful. Can those things jump off the page at you first? A couple things here. One is the which. Seems like we're modifying movies, or the man-eater of the movies. The man-eater of the movies is less than those killed. That doesn't make any sense. Maybe it's just modifying movies. Doesn't make any sense. You can eliminate C based on the which alone. Since we're talking about countable, non-countable, less than those, same mistake as A, less than the people. Can't do that. D, movies, a number lower than the people. Now this just comes back to the logic. A number lower than the people. It's like we have a bunch of people, and you guys can see why I got kicked out of art school. And there's a number down there. It doesn't make any sense. D is just illogical. I'm going to erase that because my artwork is embarrassing. E, fewer than the ones. Countable, non-countable seems fine. Fewer, countable, ones, referring back to people, countable. No issues there. Okay, so now what's this all about? You can see why I like this question. All sorts of bits and pieces. We got our countable, non-countable. We've got our logic of comparisons. Big thing on the GMAT. You're going to see a lot of that. If you struggle with comparisons, we did 2 videos back in, I think, 2017. Go take a look at those. So we have 2 left. Fewer than have been killed by bee stings. Fewer than the ones killed by bee stings. Now we're in that world of meaning, that really tough thing where it's, can you be really literal, really dig into what's that difference between these last 2? What does it mean? Okay, so fewer, so only 7 people have been killed by sharks. Fewer than have been killed by bee stings. I just can't find anything to grab hold of there other than the countable, non-countable thing is fine. What about E? Fewer than the ones. We've got a pronoun. Ones. It refers to people, but think about what that really means. When do you use ones as opposed to those or they or them? You would use it when you're talking about specific examples. I like donuts, especially the ones filled with chocolate. When I say the ones in that context, I'm talking about really pointing to specific cases, right? So specific cases here, fewer than the specific people killed by bee stings. That's nonsense. That makes no sense at all. We're not saying that those 7 people killed by sharks are fewer than the specific people killed by bee stings. That's the biggest reason why E is wrong. In B, fewer than have been killed. Now we're just comparing numbers. And for that reason, B is your winner. Okay, everybody, that's the end of things. So this is the end of series 3, video 9. Thank you for surviving to the end of the series. Our audience actually kept growing every week, which is great. So series 4 might happen at some point. We have nothing planned right now. We do have much more video content planned. If you're not already a subscriber, hit that subscribe button, GMAT Club, YouTube page. Lots of stuff coming out. We're doing all sorts of things. As far as my own videos, who knows? Come see us on the forum. Tag me. If there's something you want to see us do in a video, find one of my threads about videos. Go ahead and hit @GMAT_Ninja. Let us know if you have feedback, things you want to see us do. We try to respond, do a big video series every year and get to something that's going to be really helpful that we haven't already done. So if you have thoughts, please let me know. And that's it, ladies and gentlemen. Thank you again for joining us, and we'll see you on the forums.